I still remember the moment my father looked across the dinner table at my husband and said the words that I would never forget. "Claire, I honestly don't understand what you see in him. You could have done so much better." The conversation around us stopped instantly. The sound of forks hitting plates disappeared. Everyone looked down, pretending they hadn't heard what he said. But we all had. My husband, Ethan, didn't react the way most people would have. He didn't argue. He didn't ask my father what gave him the right to judge him. He simply smiled, nodded politely, and continued eating. But I noticed something. For a brief second, his expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The kind of disappointment that comes from someone who is used to being underestimated. And that moment stayed with me, because my father wasn't just insulting the man I loved. He was reminding me of something I had spent my entire life trying to escape. The feeling that no matter what I achieved, I would never be enough. My name is Claire Mitchell. I'm 34 years old. And for most of my life, I believe success was something I had to prove to other people, especially my father. Richard Mitchell was respected by everyone who knew him. He built a successful career in the technology industry through years of discipline and hard work. To outsiders, he was the definition of achievement. But inside our home, his approval always felt like a prize I could never win. My older brother Daniel was everything my father wanted. Daniel graduated from a prestigious university, joined my father's company, and followed the exact path that had been planned for him since he was young. Every achievement was celebrated. Every mistake was forgiven. I was different. When my mother became sick during my college years, I left school to help my family. I worked multiple jobs, learned everything the hard way, and eventually started my own small business selling home organization products online. It wasn't impressive on paper. I worked from a small apartment. I packed every order myself. I stayed awake late at night trying to figure out marketing, finances, and customers. But it was my dream. My father never saw it that way. He called it a temporary project, a hobby, something I would eventually give up when reality caught up with me. Then Ethan entered my life. He wasn't the kind of man my father expected me to marry. He didn't chase expensive things. He didn't try to impress people. He was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly focused. Ethan was a software engineer who believed that real success wasn't about showing people what you had. It was about creating something valuable. When I told my father I was going to marry him, I expected him to be surprised. I expected questions, but I never expected him to say, "Claire, you're settling for someone who hasn't become anything yet." At that moment, I thought my biggest challenge was proving my father wrong. I had no idea that one day, the same man he considered not good enough would be the person his own CEO would desperately need. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had imagined that moment for years. I thought my father would finally look at me and feel proud. I thought seeing how happy Ethan made me would change his opinion. But before I even walked down the aisle, I realized something. My father wasn't losing a daughter. He was simply accepting a decision he still didn't understand. That morning, while everyone was preparing for the wedding, my father spent most of his time talking about Daniel's latest promotion. He told relatives about my brother's future at the company. He talked about his achievements, his potential, his success. But he never once asked me if I was nervous, if I was happy, if I needed anything. I tried not to let it hurt me. It was my wedding day. I didn't want to focus on what was missing. I wanted to focus on Ethan. But then, when guests started arriving, I heard my father introduce him. "This is Ethan, the guy Claire met online." That was all he said. Not his profession, not his personality, not the man who had supported me through some of the hardest moments of my life. Just a sentence that made it clear my father still didn't see him as someone worthy of standing beside me. I ignored it. At least I tried to. I convinced myself that time would change things. That after seeing our marriage, after seeing Ethan's character, my father would eventually understand. But he didn't. A few weeks after the wedding, my father invited us to a company dinner. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was his way of accepting Ethan. Maybe this was his attempt to build a relationship with the man I loved. I was wrong. During dinner, one of my father's colleagues asked Ethan about his work. Before Ethan could answer, my father smiled and said, "Oh, Ethan is still figuring things out. Claire has always been the ambitious one." People laughed politely, but I didn't, because that sentence wasn't just about Ethan. It was about me. It erased years of sacrifice, years of working while others rested, years of building something from nothing. At that time, my business was struggling. A larger company had copied some of my product ideas, and my sales dropped faster than I could recover. Every day felt like a battle. I was answering customer complaints, managing orders, and trying to convince myself that failure wasn't waiting around the corner. Then one night my father called me. I thought maybe he wanted to check on me. Instead, he wanted to discuss Daniel. Daniel was starting a new business venture, and my father wanted our family to invest. "He has a future," my father said. I stayed silent. Then I asked, "What about my future?" There was a long pause, and then he said something that broke something inside me. "Claire, not everyone is meant to lead. Some people are meant to support those who do." I didn't argue. I didn't cry, because deep down, I knew what he really meant. In my father's eyes, Daniel was the person building a legacy. I was just someone trying to survive. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by unpaid bills, unsold inventory, and doubts I couldn't silence. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I had been wrong. Maybe my dream was too big. Maybe my father was right. Then Ethan sat beside me. He looked at the numbers on my laptop. The failed campaigns, the declining sales, the problems I thought proved I had failed. But Ethan saw something completely different. "Claire," he said quietly, "you're looking at everything that went wrong." He turned the laptop toward me. "I'm looking at everything you've already built." I looked at him confused. "What are you talking about?" Ethan smiled. "Tomorrow morning, I'll show you." I didn't know it then, but the next day, Ethan was going to reveal that he had been paying attention to my business in a way nobody else ever had. "They don't want to meet with us because of luck, Claire." "Then why?" He looked at me. "Because they finally see what you've built." That meeting changed everything. But the biggest change wasn't the growth of my company. It was the way I saw myself. For years, I had been trying to prove that I was worthy of respect. I didn't realize I already was. And while my company was growing, something else was happening. My father was beginning to notice. The same man who once asked when I would give up was now asking about my plans, my future, my next steps. But I noticed something important. His opinion didn't control me anymore. I no longer needed him to believe in me. Then, almost a year after my wedding, my phone rang. It was my father, and the hesitation in his voice told me immediately. Something had changed. The next morning, Ethan walked into my father's company, knowing exactly who he was meeting. But my father didn't. For years, Richard Mitchell had looked at Ethan and only seen what was missing. He saw the quiet man who didn't drive an expensive car, the man who didn't talk about his achievements, the man who didn't try to impress anyone. He never stopped to ask what Ethan had actually accomplished. And that was about to change. The meeting was supposed to be a simple business discussion. My father's company was looking for a partner for their upcoming expansion project, and Ethan's experience could help them solve problems they had been struggling with. But according to Ethan, the moment Michael Reynolds, my father's CEO, walked into the conference room, everything changed. Michael looked at Ethan for a few seconds. Then he smiled. "I thought I recognized your name." Those words surprised my father, because he had no idea there was any connection between them. Michael explained that several years earlier, Ethan had helped a small technology company during one of the hardest periods in its history. At the time, the company was struggling. Their systems were failing. Their customers were leaving. Most people believed they wouldn't survive, but Ethan helped rebuild their technology infrastructure and create solutions that allowed the company to grow. Years later, that same company became one of the fastest-growing businesses in the industry, and Michael had been there when it happened. He had seen what Ethan could do, not because of his title, not because of his appearance, because of his ability. My father had spent years judging Ethan by what he could see. Michael respected him because he understood what he couldn't see. And then Michael asked my father a question that he would never forget. "Richard, can I ask you something?" My father nodded. "How did you spend so many years underestimating someone who was clearly one of the most capable people in the room?" My father didn't answer, because for the first time there was nothing he could say. The truth was uncomfortable. He had judged Ethan the same way he had judged me, by appearances, by status, by the things he thought mattered. A few weeks later, my father came to my house. I knew something was different the moment he sat down. There was no lecture, no criticism, no attempt to explain why he was right. Just honesty. "Claire, I owe you an apology." It was the sentence I had waited years to hear, but strangely, it didn't feel the way I imagined, because by that point I had already healed from needing it. My father admitted that he had spent too much of his life believing success was about titles, money, and recognition. He realized he had ignored the qualities that mattered most. Hard work, loyalty, character. I accepted his apology, but I also understood something important. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending the past never happened. It meant moving forward without allowing someone else's opinion to define my worth. Today, my company has grown beyond anything I imagined when I packed my first order in my small apartment kitchen. We have a team of incredible people who believe in the mission we started with. But the biggest achievement was never proving my father wrong. It was proving to myself that I was never the person he thought I was. Ethan and I built our life through patience, trust, and believing in each other when nobody else did. And the lesson I carry with me is simple. People will judge your present and assume they understand your future. They will look at what you have today and decide what you are capable of tomorrow. But your value was never determined by the people who failed to recognize it. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the person who changes everything.